All right, so I'm Blake Albers. We feed cattle and farm in Wisner, Nebraska, and I'm here with some friends of mine. And I just want to thank Tom first of all. When you helped put together that Beef Moments of Cumming County, you know, to be honest, that was one of the only times, or one of the only videos I really have of my grandpa talking. So that's really cool for me, and I want to try and do some more of that stuff. So at any rate, let's start by introducing everybody, what they do, where they're from, how they're related. So we'll start with Al.
I'm Alan Feller, and I run Feller Commodities here in Wisner, commodity office, trading mostly grain, livestock futures. Also do some crop insurance and run a farming operation. That has been a long time family deal, the farming operation, as well as cattle feeding. No longer in the cattle feeding business myself, but still got strong ties to it. We're here today with my dad and my cousin, who are my dad, who basically started the deal, and my cousin who's carried it on. And I'll let them go from there.
All right, Tom.
Tom Feller, cattle feeder from Wisner, and we run a commercial or custom yard that kind of a cattle hotel for business people, ranchers, investors type.
And the guest of honor here, Bob.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've fed cattle for quite a few years. Sometimes I didn't know what I was doing because I lost money. And I don't know, I should have known better. But I made that mistake. A lot of it make that mistake. But then when the times are good, you just can't have enough of them.
So Bob, what year did you start feeding cattle?
Well, actually, I started when I was a freshman in high school. I was in FFA, and I bought 3 head of cattle, and that's all I had was 3 head of cattle. And kind of grew it through the ag program. I loved FFA. It was a good program in school, and I was fortunate that my dad was feeding cattle with Louis Dinklage. And once I graduated from high school, I got married, put her right away. Been going to the same girl for 5 years. We've been together probably about 65 years now. And Louis took a liking to me, and I sure liked him. And my dad did too. We had a great partnership. So it's been at it a long time.
So Tom, would you kind of delve into that, how Louis got folks started, and ask Tom Bob some relevant questions? Or
Well, of course, when Louis was feeding, or he was trying to get bigger, but you were limited because of no machinery. It was not an equipment deal.
It was horses.
It was by hand, and so when Louis could find a family like Bob's and my grandpa, and then they had other boys too, you had labor, you had the workers, and of course everything was scooped, and you went out to a pen with an old AM, or you couldn't get much done. So back then they built really big pens, and that's how Louis could expand the growth of his operation by partnering with people, and that's how that kind of got going that way.
so how many was he feeding?
Oh, I don't know at that time.
Well, okay, let's go to the year. 1952, I would say he was feeding about 10,000 head in this area, maybe a few more. And at that same time, the East Place was about 6,000, and we expanded to 5,000. And I remember my dad, when spring came, the farming equipment wasn't very big. So the men all had to go to the field, We had about 600 acres of ground, and Dad fed all the cattle by hand by himself, which at that time, in the spring, we had about 2,000 head, and he fed them twice a day by himself with the horses, throwing it on and throwing it off. But he was pretty darn strong. And so that's kind of how it was at the very beginning.
See, in 52, he'd have been 54 or 5 years old.
Yeah,
Jamie.
And he was still throwing it on and
Yeah.
off.
yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah, he was strong as an ox. I never forget one day we were putting up new fence, him and I were doing it, and he said, "You stretch the wires up." Oh, I stretched the old stretcher, and it was, I don't know, you guys probably aren't even familiar with the old rope stretcher. It had a rope on it, hemp rope on it, cable and pulleys. You hook the wire on, then over here to the post and start pulling the rope, and it never did come very good. And so I said, "I got it tight, Dad." "Oh, okay." So he rehooks it, one hand, rehooks it again. "Oh, Sonny," he said, "I thought you had that wire tight. Good thing I checked it, otherwise the cattle will all be getting out."
So what year would you have started building pens on the current place that Tom now owns?
That was about 1970.
Okay. So how old have you been in 1970? That's
Well, I've been
50 years ago.
50 years ago. So
35.
35. Yep.
yeah, about 35. Yep. And
So you now, how many of those pens did you build all at once?
I built nine pens, I think it was. We could feed 2,500.
And how was the first turn of cattle through that new operation?
All I can remember is it was profitable.
Hey,
I
there you go.
can't tell you what it was on a per head basis, but yeah, that was pretty modern compared to what I had on Dinklage and Feller. We had a lot of inside pens, and we kind of did that because we put a lot of cattle in a pen. We put 350 cattle in a pen, and you could feed, the cattle could eat on both sides of the pen, so you didn't have to put in any bunk in comparison to fence row bunk. But we built a lot of those bunks when we had the horses, so that they could walk right along and the cattle would get out of the way. It was pretty simple, other than the fact you had to throw all the feed on and off.
Yeah.
So Tom, what would you say the percentage of cattle feeders that are in Cumming County were started because of Louis' influence, or just people being in the business?
Well, I don't know that there was quite a few that, Bellers and them were tied to him, and Bob, and them. But I think I think a lot of people just looked over the fence and mirrored him.
Right.
It's kind of like we do today. I remember your dad or your grandpa, when he was building pens, he got an earth mover out there and leveled everything, and
Got better.
and that was new to everybody. Nobody had done that, but he probably picked it up from Kansas or Texas or something. I don't know, but not many people had ever done that. Most people just poured the bunks right over the hills.
Okay.
So like I said, people watch other people, and then Louis was around. People could sit and have lunch with him and have a beer with him or whatever, and then he was in that office all the time. So a lot of people just stopped there.
Yeah.
And he was, I was only 20 years old, and he talked to me like I was in business with him for 30 years,
Yeah.
But he was good about that. He liked talking about his business. The business. But so that, I think that because he was accessible, a lot of people picked up on that business.
Well, they seen how successful he was. They thought they could do it too.
Yeah, or at least copy it a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
Well, that was one thing I saw in that Beef Moments video that you highlighted, it was probably not quite 20 years ago, was you said, you know, you had some of these mentors that were 40 years older than you, but they never seemed that old,
No, they didn't.
you know, because they were always pushing and trying to develop what they were
And they
doing.
would always talk to somebody my age, you know, and include you in the conversation, and include you in what was going on, which was pretty important when you're 35, 40 years old.
Right. Right. So, well, actually, we're going to kind of look through some newspaper clippings, Bob. And you know what's really interesting is it's really hard to find newspaper clippings that have anything with your name in it because there's so many mentions of Bob Feller the same age because of the
Bob
baseball player.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I think you were telling me one time that you and Grandpa actually got confused for Bob Feller, the baseball player, and Herb Alpert, he'd have been in a band.
player.
Trumpet
Trumpet
player.
Tijuana band.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was out in Phoenix. And we didn't know this, but we stopped at the Roy Rogers Hotel, and that was a really nice hotel and a swimming pool. And so we called from there for reservations one night to eat out. And, we said, could you get reservations for Bob Feller? Oh, we didn't know you were in town. You bet. We'll have your table all ready for you. How many will there be? Well, there'll be 4. But well, then the next night, Herb calls up. Oh, Herb, we didn't know you were in town. And they thought that he was
Herb
Teal.
Alpert.
Yeah, Herb Albert. Another good one about that, though, was him and I flew down to Texas to cattle yards, and Herb flew us in his plane. And we were coming back, and he says, let's stop down here in Kansas, this one feed yard he knew about. So he radios ahead, could somebody pick us up from the feedlot? And the guy says, well, who should I say this is? And so Herb said, well, it's Bob Feller and Herb Albers. So he let him know, and oh yeah, they'll be here to pick you up. Well, they thought it was Herb Albert again.
Yeah.
And so here comes this great big old Lincoln. You remember the old Lincolns, how the hood was as long as this tabletop?
Yeah.
And he comes roaring into the airport, gets out, great big old Stetson hat on, and oh my God, he was all excited because he had some customers. He was really disappointed. But it was fun. On that same trip, this is how relaxed your dad is and casual. He's flying across towards where we wanted to go, and there's this great big passenger plane flew right underneath us. It was coming. We could see it coming, but it was going down to land. And we were flying right over a damn airstrip, and he didn't know it. And it just, oh, by golly, he says, I think we better get a little air.
I think he had a slightly more casual attitude towards aviation than I did, or do, rather. Oh. Tom, you had your pilot's license, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. But it just was, I just couldn't go enough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
then the
get that.
instrument part of it, I just never did take, and that's what you got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I could fly to Valentine back and stuff like that, but but
That's the fun stuff anyway.
yeah.
So.
Pretty soon I figured it out that I could drive there in 3 hours just as easy as I could fly there in 1 hour.
That's well, that's kind of the problem. The fun trips are also pretty accessible by vehicle.
Yeah. and you didn't get caught.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd go fly to Valentine, and then you got caught there for overnight because the weather got bad. Or something.
That happened in Maryville,
I'm gonna-
Kansas.
Tell a story about Tom.
I would like that.
Judy and I was with him, flew out west out to Hyannis, and there's a cemetery on top of the hill out there, and the landing strip was right down below the cemetery on a flat spot.
It's
And
short.
Yeah, it's real short, and then on the end of the runway there was a cross ditch. And so they were telling us on the radio about landing that this is a short strip and you got to be really low when you come over the cemetery. Well, hell, I thought we was going to stay there.
We were low.
We were low. Just barely getting down.
Yeah,
off.
the cemetery's like here, and the runway's like here, and it's probably 2 blocks in between there.
Yeah, that was
You gotta
close.
just drop right in.
But he made it.
We've survived it.
We had to worry about the cemetery first and then the ditch second.
You're gonna have a permanent stay.
So then we're flying home and left too late in the afternoon. It got dark. And he didn't have his driver's license for at night.
Well, I did almost everything by sight, see?
Yeah.
So I knew I was heading east. Well, there was Norfolk and there was Columbus, and Columbus was bigger looking, or more lights or whatever, so I
Right.
just headed for Columbus. And we ended up in Columbus, had to go north.
Well,
Did you land, or you just figured out you're in the wrong
Yeah,
spot?
well, I figured it out. I could see. But back then, you used to have a thing that you tuned to the 780 radio
Yeah.
station. I can't remember what the VOR.
Yeah, VOR.
Yeah. And it wasn't working in there.
Oh, the Columbus
So
one
I was
wasn't.
going to do it. No, Columbus, the whole radio wasn't working.
Oh,
Yeah.
your airplane. It wasn't the VOR was out.
No.
Your airplane was not properly equipped to
So,
navigate.
No, back then those planes didn't have much in them.
Yeah.
yeah.
They were more like pickups back then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then we're flying into Norfolk Airport in the dark, and the lights aren't on the landing strip. And Tom said, "Oh," I said, "this is really a neat deal, Bob. Just watch this. All you gotta do is flip this lever
No, you can't key the mic.
or key the mic." And he says, "The lights will come on the runway." And he flipped it.
Nothing.
Dark.
I don't know what was wrong that day.
Oh. So 1970, you got started at your main yard that I knew when I was growing up and all that, and then you added capacity in what years do you think?
Well, in 1984 or 5, Tom left out here and he came out there, and then he started expanding it.
In '84.
Yeah, it was fall 85.
Yeah, it could have been.
Yep. And then, I don't remember what all the expansions were. 92, 97, 2000. And then in 92, we went up to Stanton and built that yard in Stanton
Oh, the Paradise Yard. Yep.
and started up there. And that started out just going to be a winter deal. Well, then we started feeding more there. And then it was a lean and mean deal. We didn't have any money to spend, so we just used wooden bunks and stuff, moved them around. Great big pins, because
Yeah.
it was real sandy. It was not worth much anyway. Well, that land only cost $400 an acre that year, that time, 92.
That's insane.
That is insane.
Anyway, but it had a bad thing with it because it had a big power line that went through it. So they couldn't put a pivot on it or anything.
Gotcha.
And then it had all those trees. It had rows of trees, and those rows of trees were there to stop sand from blowing. Well, then that looked like a
Not for
perfect
snow
winter,
or shade. Yeah.
a good winter feeding thing. So, anyway, so we were up there, and then I don't know what the last year we expanded up there. 2003 or 4 or 5, somewhere in there. I don't know. But then the funny thing you don't realize about your town or your area, there was no infrastructure up there for feeding cattle.
Yeah.
There was nobody to work on cement, nobody to do water lines. There was nobody, electricians hardly. We had to bring everybody from Wisner all the time. So that ended up costing more money. And then the reason we went up there is we thought we could buy corn and hay up there because they were a low cattle county. So those farmers didn't have anywhere to sell
Right.
their corn. Well, that worked for about 2 years, and then they built the ethanol plant at
And
Columbus.
that became a huge thing.
then that
Yeah.
they forgot what our name was, and everybody had to go to Columbus. So, that changed that corn thing right now.
Right.
Yeah, we were probably buying corn. Was about 20 cents, 25 cents cheaper than Wisner.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. That's insane for
it was
that
huge.
small amount of
But they didn't have a
Mileage.
market.
Well,
Yeah.
that time corn was probably $2.50, $3.
Yeah,
yeah.
Probably $2. So
yeah,
10% cheaper.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Bob, what are your some of your impactful moments that you remember where you started to, change course on the business or grow faster or pedal back or, are there things you remember that were just like that was a turning point or an expansion point or an emotional roller coaster, which seems to
That
be
was
most
probably
of it.
Early.
64.
Oh, there was one in '64, but that wasn't bad. It's not near as bad as '84.
No,
That was a killer. In the cattle market, that was a tough time.
1984.
Yeah.
So walk through
Early.
84.
Oh shoot.
I don't remember
know-
what the cattle were losing per se, but interest got up to 21%, and just everything you touched was bad.
Yeah. Well, that
Yeah.
was the killer right there. The 21% interest because
Farming wasn't any good. There was
nothing was any good, and you can't make it paying 21% interest. I mean, it's you roll them cattle 3 times in a year, and you pay 21% all year long.
Well, in cattle, it would really be bad now because cattle are so much more valuable.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Oh yeah.
But back then, it was still bad. But it's funny. Back when Bob was with Louis'd supply the cattle, so the interest. Bob would supply all the labor and everything, and so that was the yardage or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And they were about even.
Well, and we also paid half the building the feed yard.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't like you didn't have anything in it. You had,
Right.
And you had all the equipment for everything else, and so
Yeah, he had
and
to have all the equipment.
Actually, I figured it up different times, and it about washed itself, the interest versus what we were doing, and that's kind of why he did it,
Yeah.
and which made it nice. You didn't have to have the money to buy the cattle, and then plus he got the labor and part of this stuff paid for, along with it. And
Well-
how we did that was every year. April 1st was the new year for Louis' business. So we never kept track of anything other than that the first of the year we had 20 pens of cattle and there was say 5,000 head in the 20 pens, depending on when they came in and what they were worth the 1st of April if they were going to be sold. So we just put a figure on what they were worth the 1st of April. You didn't weigh them up. You didn't do anything to them. You just had them. So if you had 5,000 head, and you'd put a value on them, and that's how we decided what the profit was for the year, because the cattle through the year had made the money up to that point. And so it worked really well for both of us, because the 1st of April was the end of his year. So if he needed more expense, he'd pay it out before the 1st. Or if he needed not have the expense, he'd hold it till after the 1st. And then the other thing was, back in the day, there used to be a property tax on cattle. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't. I had no idea.
Yeah, that was bad. So the 1st of the year, you had to write down how many cattle you had, how fat they were, whether they were feeders, what weight they were, blah, blah, blah. So, and if you had a lot of fat cattle on hand, your taxes were going to be higher because of that. They would value them at a lot more money. So that was always the struggle, trying to make sure you didn't have any fat cattle at the 1st of the year. which was a bad deal for feeding cattle.
So did it change the market occasionally? I mean, did people let cattle go early and
Yeah, it did, and plus it made you hold cattle too,
right?
depending on what the situation was. So, hope they never come back with that. Especially now with the prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, hell.
Well, they're trying to actually they're looking at a different tax structure now that
Yeah.
they're trying to push. Now I have no idea. I'm sure that an ag exemption would have to be there, otherwise it's not going to go through. But they were trying to move property taxes into more transactional taxes.
Yeah.
So, what would you highlighted 84 as a rough time? What was a
Well, early 80s.
early 80s?
Yeah.
Okay. What was a really exciting time before I was around?
You mean exciting? You mean making a lot of money?
Well, that's generally yeah.
79, 78, 79 in there.
Yeah.
That's when a big inflation boom hit too.
Yeah.
78.
I remember some of them cattle making $300 a head, which was huge.
Yeah.
It'd be like 1,000 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would just be insane.
And I don't know. It seemed like it was a lot simpler that the cattle. You didn't have as much invested in the cattle like we do today. You know, the vaccinations and the implants and all the hullabaloo that you got to go through is a lot different now than what it was back then. It's pretty. You vaccinated and implanted, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was pretty much it. It was.
Tom, you could probably speak to this too. How do you feel about equipment costs versus when you started?
Well, it was funny when I went out to his place there in '85. Dink borrowed me a Rorta feed wagon, and so I used that Rorta for quite a while. And Bob gave me a loader tractor to use and tractor. Well, then I wanted to get that wagon back to Dink because you know how that goes.
Yeah.
And Russ Bikerites and I went to a farm sale over at Wakefield, and that was about the low day on a farm sale. But I bought a Rorta feed wagon with a scale on it for $700, and brought that thing home. And I used that thing 3 years, or probably 2 or 3 years, and then went back to a feed truck with a mixer box and stuff on it. So that was as cheap as it got. And of course now, a new feed truck, big. Of course they're bigger and they're better and they're all that stuff. But shit, they're $350,000.
Right.
But that deal I did when in '85 there, we had nice stuff. We had a payloader, we had a feed truck, we had all that stuff. Well, when my dad wanted out and sold the deal, then I had to go back to lean and mean again. So then you're back to loader tractor and a Rorta and all that. You had to go backwards in time. It's kind of like now if you had a 24-row corn planter with all the gizmos on it, you went back to a 4-row planter. That's kind of what I did. And
What year
but
was
that's
that?
what you had to do. 85.
85. Yeah.
But that's what I had to do you're basically starting over,
Yeah.
And at the time, everybody was on pins and needles, and so you didn't want to spend any money on anything hardly. It was a dilemma, and the ranchers, they were in trouble at that time because they kind of had a drought right in there, so they sent a lot of cattle down to me, which worked out good because a lot of the people I knew around Wisner, they didn't have any money
Yeah.
to jump out at, get more or nothing. But Bob always fed a few of his own over there, and then he had the Dinklage and Feller deal, so that was good. He could feed some, but I couldn't do anything.
You could just do the work.
Yeah, I could do the work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and I suppose that's why there's been a pretty good culture of custom feeding in Cumming County is folks are willing to do the work and vary their percentage of ownership up and down with whatever, the market or whatnot dictates.
Well, it's a little bit like guys that farm pretty big and they try to add on 2 more farms to average their thing in or whatever. Well, the cattle's the same way. If you could feed some cattle for some other guys, you could get up to a size that afforded you the nicer stuff.
Right.
And you get a nicer feed wagon or truck or whatever, and you can afford it because of the number of cattle you're feeding. But the custom business is a good business, but like you get into a situation we're in right now, I mean, we're back to this is I've never seen people so scared again.
Yeah, and quickly.
Yeah,
Things were fine a month ago.
it fell apart in a month.
Yeah. Bob, have you been paying attention?
Yeah, I'm so thankful I'm not feeding.
Yeah, it's kind of
Bob's blessed.
it's kind of ugly.
Another 10 years and I can look back and say, I knew that was coming.
Yeah,
Got out just in time. Well, one of the things I was going to talk about or ask you guys about is the marketing and economic challenges within the industry, because one of the things I'll read you that I think is kind of funny is the more things change, the more that they stay the same in some regard. But then there's other examples where it seems less evident and that it is actually getting more challenging in that there are less Tom Fellers out there that started their yard in their 30s and grew and grew. That seems to be, fewer and fewer folks are able to make that happen. But then if you go, I'll read this quick because I found this funny. And you guys can talk about the Nixon price freeze after I read through this, Bob. I'm sure you'll have something to think about. So this is my grandpa, Herb Jr. They're talking. He was being interviewed for the Nixon price freeze. This is August 8th, 1973. They'd talked to a gentleman out of Meadow Grove that fed about 1,000 head, and then they went and were interviewing Herb. And it says, at Wisner, about 40 miles east of the Collins farm, the Albers say the profits have never been better for the cattle feeder. I would guess we made $70 or $80 a head on the last load we sold, the younger Albers said. A stocky man of 32 with the glibness of a big city businessman. I can't deny we have made money. We're making money on the cattle we have right now and will on the stock that we have on feed. And he then goes on to discuss, the price freeze and what the implications are there. 1975, so not very long after that.
oh, that was brutal.
Yeah. The article is titled Cattle Feeders Optimistic. Albers, who markets slaughter cattle nearly every week, pegged his current break-even price at between $42 and $44 per hundredweight. Feeders have made some money the last few months, but are still not in a position to come back strong. Many now are just getting out of trouble with their banker, and they don't want to get in trouble again.
Yeah,
So we went from
They did it 9 years later.
well, we went from really excited and making money to talking about. So in between that period of time, people got in trouble with their bankers. This is only a 2.5 year period.
Well, see, after the freeze come off, the whole world thought it was going to go higher,
Yeah.
and everybody held their cattle, and all of a sudden, all these fat cattle were here, and it crashed. It crashed like, well, at that time it crashed $10 a hundred, which was huge, but that's where it all came apart. It
Yeah.
crashed after that freeze.
Well, it said here that they went from 122,000 being slaughtered in the Omaha area, which I don't know what they're considering the Omaha area on a weekly basis. That had to have been quite a bit.
It had to be Dakota City and Denison.
They went from 203,000 down to 122,000. So people must have been holding some livestock. I mean,
That's what happened. People held because everybody in the world, all the gurus, you know, they all said we were going to explode after this freeze come off. Well, it didn't. It didn't do that.
Wasn't that one of the moves that Bob Gotch kind of got right? He
was short.
He was short.
Yeah.
So that was, but I found that just pretty funny. You know, you're talking about the span of, you know, a very short amount of time, been in and out of trouble, and going back towards it quickly.
See, that was the first pen of cattle I fed was in '73.
Really?
Yeah, and then they lost. Well, I remember at the time they lost $9,000, and it was like 130 head. But that was a brand new car.
Yeah.
So that was right away. That should have been my first lesson right then that they had enough of this shit. But and then '74, remember, Bob, we had a bad drought. I mean, we didn't raise nothing.
Well, I got to tell you a story about in '74. Doug and I were feeding some cattle out at his place, and we had about 600 heifers, and they came out of Canada, and they didn't have any size to them. Bought them out of Norfolk, and we were in trouble because they were not the kind of cattle anybody wanted at the packing house. Well, I don't remember now which packing house it was in Omaha. I almost think it was Dan Kennelly came out and said that this, Hy-Vee grocery store or something like it wasn't Hy-Vee at the time, it was some other grocery store. They wanted these small steaks. Doug and I got a big grin on our face. We had the right cattle for the small steaks. And he come out with styrofoam box and said, they want the steaks to fit in this box. And we got them all sold to that outfit. It saved us.
Yeah.
It was big. I mean, that was a huge deal. Anyhow, they wanted those small steaks to go into that box. Who in the hell would ever come up with that idea, that they wanted these steaks that size? Well, what it was is they're saying the meat was too high priced, so they needed these small steaks.
Portion size down,
that
yeah.
They could buy the steak, one steak, and not have to give a fortune for it.
And it'd still be a thicker cut, I'd imagine.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, you know, that's some of the challenges we run into
Yeah,
on ribeyes, you know.
yeah.
And that's why you saw folks pushing the ribeye fillet, if you will, where they'd pull that cap off, tie it up, sell that separate.
Yeah.
There's some interesting things there. So you guys also kind of talked about mentorship and passing things down. So obviously, you know, you would call Louis your mentor?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My dad and Louis and Herb Albers Sr., they were all mentors. And what was good about it is what I said before. You could talk to them, and they'd actually listen to you like you knew something. You know, if you had an idea or whatever, that you didn't have to be afraid to talk about what you thought. They weren't going to put you down. They'd be more encouraging than anything.
So I obviously, he died in 78 or 9. I didn't know Herb Sr.
You know?
What was his temperament like? What was he?
Oh, he was a great guy. His temperament as far as the market?
Well,
Or anything.
anything, life, markets.
I think in life in general, he felt good about life. He enjoyed life. And you know, you'd be at a party of all different age group, and he would always make sure that he would talk to me and ask me, well, now, Bob, what do you think of this market? Like I really knew something, you know. And
Yeah, he did that to me too.
yeah, he was a great person. Yeah, he got to see a lot too. Well, all them guys did. Stuff we're talking about, they had the same thing happen to them when they were 20 and 30.
Yep.
You know, it was nothing new, except the fact they had already experienced it. And yeah,
He was really good to my dad. My dad bought a truck when he was like 19 years old, and he went into the banker to buy this truck, and he told the banker that Herb Albers said I'm going to haul corn for Herb Albers, and then the banker went along with letting him buy the truck because he had work in front of him.
Gotcha.
So he hauled a lot of corn out to.
well, now that's when we lived north of town. We lived right across the section, and you guys bought that land since. But and Doug would tell a story about Herb Senior. He said he'd send me off for a load of corn and bring it back. And that's when you were feeding with horses yet. And so then Herb Senior would tell him, now when you get that unloaded tomorrow, you stop out here by my house and I'll let you know if I need another load or not. So Doug would stop. Doug tells me this story. So Doug would stop out there by the house, and he said Herb wasn't even up yet. He said
Looking out the bedroom window.
so he said I'd honk the horn, and pretty soon the upstairs window would go up, and Herb would be standing there. Yeah, Doug, he said, I don't think we need any more corn today. Well, you know, same deal. You want to keep the supply down because he was getting it out of Laurel. So you knew he always had a supply. But, well, Doug said, Herb, the boys said that they're going to need corn to feed tonight. Oh, by golly. Gosh darn, he says. Well, I don't know. Well, then maybe you probably better go get another load. Oh, I think it was great. That's back when Corvettes came out, and he bought a new Corvette. And, you know, to buy a Corvette and live out in the country and go down that dirt road every day would be a surprise that anybody would do it. But he did. And he enjoyed it.
He sounds like a character.
Oh, yeah, he was a good guy.
So,
Well, and then when Doug and him would go to a sale up at Erickson or up west someplace, they'd both go to, well, he always liked it because Doug would drive. But he always brought a bottle. And
I want to get this son of a bitch
so
on.
they'd have a little nip on the way up to the sale and then a little nip on the way home. Then they'd stop and have a steak someplace. But they had agreed when they went up that Herb was going to buy one weight heifers and Doug was going to buy the other weight heifers. So one was going to buy the lightweights, and I would imagine Doug was buying the lightweights and Herb was probably buying the heavier ones. And then that way, if they got part loads, they could put them together to get the truck home, you know. So they kind of worked it together. But
so how much age difference? How old is Doug?
Doug is
10 years older than Bob.
10 years to learn, Bob.
So he'd be
95.
95 now.
Gotcha.
See, I think was Herb Senior, was he born in 1900?
1901.
1901.
Yep. Because Madeline was 1911. They were a decade apart.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because Louis was 1902. Chrissy Coles was 1910.
And,
All those guys were kind of right in there.
Oh, out of frame.
So, if we're going back through this idea that, you know, kind of everything's the same and there's going to be challenges, there's going to be bad years, there's going to be good years. What advice would you give a younger person in this industry?
Well, I guess we're going to have to pay more attention to politics. Who's president? Who's the Secretary of Ag? It's probably, when we're at this younger age, you're not real well aware of all the rules they can come up with and change your life, which they did in the past. One time we went to Washington D.C. because they were going to roll the cattle market back $10 a hundred. Packers were on; they were really on a trip on that deal, and so Herb and I went together when we got to Washington D.C. and going down to talking to the senators and the congressmen, and they were terrible. I mean, they insulted you. They didn't want to listen to you. This one senator from Ohio, he backed us right out of his office. And when we first came in there, he didn't even look up. He was sitting at his desk like here, and we came in that way where he's at. And we got up to the desk, and chairs were right there. He didn't tell us to sit down or nothing. He just kept his head down, and we was talking to him about it. And pretty soon he gets up and he comes around and gets right in front of us. He kept getting closer to us, so we backed out of his office. And he got us out in front of all these people that were working in the office ahead of him, his people that were working for him. Well, and the doors going out of that office were huge. And we were standing in front of the doors to go out the hallway. And finally I said to him, you were elected to this office to do your job for the people. And he says, and you're not even listening to us. So I said, you're not doing your job for the people. You're doing whatever that somebody's got you in their pocket. And out the door we went. And Herb says, yeah, feller. He said, you hadn't hardly said a thing in those other places, and then you tell that guy that. He said, I was just sure he's going to grab us by the collar and pull us back in.
So how old would you have been then?
How old was I? Well, I was probably about 32.
Yeah. So my age. I'm 33 right now. Yeah.
Boy, he pissed me off, though.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, the meat cutter guys were in his back office, and they were in there yet.
Oh, at the same time?
They had been in there talking to him ahead of us. And it was them guys that had him in their pocket. Yeah,
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, so anyhow, they got it so they didn't roll the prices back. We got in Omaha, got off the plane, and I can't even remember the guy who was in charge of the feeders. Anyhow, they were calling on the speaker for him, and he goes over there and he comes back and he says, well, they said they'd got it stopped, that they weren't going to roll the prices back when we left Washington, D.C. And we got off the plane and they called for him to come over, and they said they changed their mind. They're going to roll it back. Well, what's interesting about this story, too, is I had talked to Louis before I went on the damn trip, and Louis says, man, it ain't going to make no difference. He says, there's no need of going out there. You're just wasting your time. He says, they're going to do what they damn please. He said, you get back home, and he says, whatever they told you, they'll change their mind, and we'll still be looking for a rollback. Just exactly what happened. But he knew it.
Yeah.
But he'd been through it before. Not that exact same thing, but he knew how it operated.
That's wild. So did you go as an association or?
Yeah, as an association.
Yep.
Yeah, feeders.
So that was National Livestock.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did it become National Cattlemen's Beef?
77. No, National Cattlemen's Beef. That was probably about 94 or 5.
Okay.
But the National Cattlemen's
Association. was made back.
It was the
That
77. There was something they did. I can't remember if they changed the name a little bit. Maybe it was the American National Cattlemen's, and they just went to National Cattlemen's, or they did something there. But
well, and your grandpa, and he was the spokesman for that deal, and Louis and
Great grandpa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
great grandpa.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all threw in $5,000 or something like that. There's a story about that.
I'll have to find that.
Yeah,
I'll put a link in that under the video.
Yeah.
Remind
yeah,
me.
Bill Holland talks on that one feeders tape about it. It's on YouTube.
I'll get that.
He talked about that deal where they put that Pete Horst, and I can't believe Pete Horst did, but Pete Horst and Louis, Herb, and Martin Smith at Pender. Then they took that money out there, and I guess the whole thing was about ready to collapse, and
kept it alive.
for a minute to get their shit together.
That's funny. So what's this? I printed out this article. It says Cattleman's Estate divides Nebraska town. What, Tom? Do you remember all that with Louis' deal? I thought that
Well,
was
you
interesting.
know, I do, but I wasn't on the inside of any of that. And what the, supposedly they thought they had some basis for what they were doing there. Bill Holland did, and it was kind of that Hawkinson that was the superintendent. They kind of had their heads together.
Oh.
I'm not sure they had the public's pulse on that. And I really don't know what
What was your question?
Well,
No,
when they sued the foundation over how the estate, how it was being run or something.
Well, I think
My
it was how it was going to be divided.
Yeah.
There's 4 of them got some money out of that deal that probably was never supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Well, see, the only reason I printed that out is I used to go to lunch every day with Grandma Madeline, great Grandma Madeline, and she would always yap about that. That was, because that was still fresh in her mind. Well, I guess it would have only been 6 or 7 years ago when I was doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's what it was about, and there, it sure looks like there was something that didn't quite go the way. Bob and I always talked. We'd just like to have Louis come back for one day and say, "Who got what?" But that ain't gonna happen.
No. Oh. So the next thing I printed out was Tradition Binds Cattle Business, and it's a young Tom Feller. What are you, 37 here?
Could be.
37? But you really highlighted the strong tradition of cattle feeding in Cumming County, and I thought that was really, really cool. But it said it's grown from 1,500 head to 10,000 head. This was 1993. So that would have been on your main place here in town.
Well, we didn't have all the cattle there at that time. I was feeding at some other places too. We had. Well, right then, I don't know if that's when we had Warren Heller's place with Jim,
Oh, yeah.
and then we had some over there on that where Alan's shop is now. There was 4 or 5 big pens there. We had scattered all over.
Scattered out,
'Cause
yeah.
Couldn't write a check to build any, see, so you just moved them or you tried to do what you could do.
When do you think when did we see most of the larger corporate yards being built in the South? When did that start? In the 70s? Or was it before that?
Well, this Packer deal with their tie to these feed yards started in the 90s, mid-90s. And that's when the market really got out of whack. We were talking about bad cow markets. Well, then you could always buy the feeder cow down in the money the next round to give you a chance to make some money back if you had any money left.
Right.
But since then, like what we just witnessed, you get a bull market going, and all of a sudden the break-evens are $10 higher than the cattle you're selling. That's a bad trade. But it used to be if the market was bad, people would back away from the market. People wouldn't buy cattle. The feeder cattle would get cheaper. Well, now these corporates come in, and they got to run the machine, so they just buy them whatever it is.
Right. There was always an opportunity to get that equity back on the next turn or two
Yeah,
versus
in the old days.
versus now where you're always buying on quite a bit of hope.
Well, and if these packers feed a lot of cattle, they say they don't feed any cattle. Yeah, right. But they got a whole different deal. If they're making $500 over here in the packing house, they can feed cattle for nothing,
Right.
for zero or break even. But a guy that's his living, he can't feed for a break even. So that's where it gets screwed up with the different mentalities.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to fix it because it's so far that way now that they say up there in the Pacific Northwest that it's all Tyson. They own all the cattle between them and Agri Beef. They
Yeah.
own them all.
Yeah, that very well could be. I know there's some folks that do some work for like Country Natural Beef or some of these and Agri Beef's got some independent producers, but yeah, there's also a ton of corporate deals there as well.
Yeah, I mean but they have no market out there other than Tyson.
Exactly. That's what they have.
And the big Kansas yards and Texas yards, they're just a lot of people all tied in, which and sometimes it's you have to
Right.
survive.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me into the what do you think the future of the cattle industry looks like? We'll start with Bob. Bob, what does the future hold here?
Oh boy, I've gotten a little too far removed now at this point.
That's why you're in a great position to tell us.
Well,
We're all watching it day by day at this point.
well, like where it's at today, I'd be just like you guys. I'd be just damn scared doing anything. You think, well, I think I can make this work, and that I think I can make it work doesn't mean it's going to. So, are you going to take that gamble and lose it all, or what are you going to do? But you got a feed yard. Sure, you got to have some cattle, but I wouldn't think it'd be time to be trying to be the guy that had the full feed yard all the time of my own cattle. So I was not feeding any commercial. That'd be tough.
Yeah.
Scary.
Were there some days that you can put yourself in essentially the shoes as if you were here today? What moments do you think were like that for you, just personally? It doesn't have to be the market. It could have been a day that.
Oh, I remember. Jeez, I don't know what year it was anymore, but I remember I had several thousand head of cattle to sell, of my own cattle, and bidding down. I can still see myself coming home that day for dinner and telling Judy that there ain't no way in hell I'm going to sell these cattle at this price. Well, I didn't. And the next week I sold them for $10 a hundred less.
$10. Wow.
And it was already rotten.
Yeah.
The price that they'd bid me, it was already rotten. And next week I sold them for $10 a hundred less. And boy, I tell you what, it just about makes you sick when it's like that.
Yeah.
And could be about the situation we're in right now, where they've got her down pretty good, and you say, I'm not selling. All at once, you're selling, but it's for less than what you could have got today. I don't mean to make it sound worse than it is, but
Well, it's just reality, right? These kinds of things have happened before. So
Yeah.
What when? So is that a moment, you know, you're driving home dreading? How did you handle like stress and stuff like that with your family? Was it you told Judy everything, you wore it on your sleeve, or did you always?
Well, I don't think you tell them everything. I mean, it's, you know, because they're not right in the midst of it. And but I talked about it, sure. And yeah, I just.
Because in Wisner, you'd have quite a few people with a shared experience, if you will, to talk to anyway. But I always find it interesting, you know, we've been, Britt and I have been through some stressful times, and, you know, how you carry that at home. What do you just kind of bear yourself versus what you're discussing as a couple or as a married couple, and you know, it's there's too much and too little, that's for certain.
Well, in those situations, it's really hard when you took the $10 a hundred less the next week, but the feeders didn't follow along like they should have. So then you still got to buy. If you're going to keep feeding, you're going to buy some feeders that are too high at that same time.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, your emotions play such a big factor in your decisions when you get in a situation like that.
So you're buying it. You're stepping out of a cash to cash loss into buying a premium, and that is going to be what we're in. You know, to some degree.
That's what we've been in.
That's what we've been in. Yeah. Now it'll be interesting to see what happens if these prices actually come to fruition in the cash market. What things look like. I know we've taken a big step back already, but Al, what do you have on your mind here?
I'm just listening.
Al's a silent participant today.
I am.
He's learning. So let's go to the more recent one that everybody, even my age group, will recall. I've got a picture of Tom here, and I
got something. They printed that picture.
I clipped this, and I'm going to ask Nathan to put this up in the video. I clipped.
was depressed.
And so when you clip these articles on newspaper.com, you got to put it in a little description. So mine's just sad Tom. You'll see in this photo, they've got Tom looking down on his luck here.
Oh, that was the worst day of my life.
So that was a worst day of your life, you said?
Oh.
What year was it?
Well, that was the year of the mad cow.
Oh.
And I was in Vail with all my whole family.
Christmas Eve.
It was Christmas Eve. And shabunk. That son of a bitch. I had people calling me saying they're so sorry for me. I mean, people that knew the business. I mean, that son of a buck was going to be dead on Monday. And we were trying to do that LRP thing or something because it was 2 days back. Or
So LRP had just been introduced at that time.
yeah, it was that week.
And yeah, basically that week. Maybe it wasn't that week, but it was really
Real
close to
close.
that. So it was a new product. And it's like,
And everybody's
oh my
ready to
God,
abuse it.
this is a savior because it's Christmas Eve. And I was at the doctor's office for leg surgery and on the phone. And came home, was in my office late, writing all these LRP policies. And every single one of them got denied
Oh, really?
Yeah.
because it was
Too big of an event.
yeah.
Yeah.
And at that time, there wouldn't have been that many people writing LRP. But, yeah, so that was my experience of LRP.
It was a first class wreck. And it got over pretty quick, but
No, I would have been 13 or 14, and I found out before my dad. Just by, I don't even remember how I found out. But I ran out to the driveway, and of course, this kind of goes back to Herb Sr. Grandpa Herb Jr. always talked about him having a nice place to suffer during the Great Depression. Dad had just moved into his new house. and so I remember running out in the driveway, and Dad had pulled up in his white pickup, and I said, hey, I said, they found BSE in the U.S., And he goes, "You're shitting me." And
No.
and I'll never forget. He spun out and ran down to the office, and he was pretty sick about it. But
About like right now, I mean, here, the bad part about these markets is supply and demand is one thing. Okay, you got a few too many. Maybe the exports will help you through it or whatever. But when you got a deal like what's happened in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks with the market, and now you find out maybe it's something to do with this LRP, and they didn't operate it right, or the there's something going on there with this deal. And so people wrote puts against it to try to bring in some money because you're locked into the price, you can't get out of it. And the market was going up, so they wrote puts against these LRPs or something. And now that's all collapsing the other direction. I don't know. There's all kinds of stories out there.
yeah.
But and it's all government produced.
Well, and go ahead, Bob.
I mean, I mean, if not this, but if this market that just happened, where we took $300 to $350 a head away from these cattle, if that would have happened to the farmers per acre, $300 an acre, got taken away from them by some fluke deal, there would be a mass hysteria. And if it was the stock market dropping, I think this market's dropped 18%, hasn't it now?
Yeah.
If they dropped the stock market 18%, well,
They'd shut it down.
Yeah, they'd shut down.
Well,
What in the hell?
I think that the more interesting comparison is that we do have a really relatively stable beef market. So the output of the live animal is actually really stable. I mean, considering.
Right. Well, and that's the next thing.
Yeah.
Our cash price hasn't deteriorated just too bad.
No.
And that's kind of what happened to the corn. The real market took over. When the futures kept dropping in this corn market, and it's still dropping, but the supply is the supply, and that's what happened last summer. Corn was $1.50 over the board and all that heavy shit. But boy, the cattle, we only got 4 guys to sell to.
Yeah.
Farmer has millions of people to sell to. But
But 4 guys set the price for all of it,
Well, and
and the
the
corn too.
well, that could be possible, but not in the country.
Yeah, because
On
it's
the
all,
futures.
all based off of this person or this person.
the farmers do have better lobbyists. The row croppers have better lobbyists.
I don't know what it is,
That's got to be some of it.
but I know one thing: if they would have shellacked the farmer $300 an acre,
There's more of them.
That
There's
is
more
true.
farmers than,
Yeah.
than cattle feeders.
so
Well, Bob,
Yeah.
so one of the things I wanted to do tonight, besides just kind of chat about your history and the cattle markets and how things go, is I named my son Herb after my grandpa. Of course, he's never going to meet him. That's a lot of people don't get to meet their great grandparents. Any stories, thoughts, anything that I can show my son Herb someday when he's old enough to watch a video about his namesake,
About Herb Jr.
about Herb Jr. Yeah.
probably don't want to put them on tape, huh?
There's probably a few of those. How old is he going to be when he watches this?
Well, I don't know. I can tell you some stories about your dad that they're all good stories, and but they're just stories. They're not anything that like what we've been talking about. It's a friendship that Herb and I had together. Would you be interested in that?
Yes.
Well, we moved. We came from Lyons. We lived south of Wisner for a while, and then we moved north of Wisner, across the section from your dad's place, your grandpa's place. And so when we moved out north of town, I would have been about 10, and Herb would have been about 8. And so I had 2 sisters just older than me, and they used to babysit for your folks or your grandparents for Herb and Herb,
Yeah.
Herb and
Herb Senior.
so anyhow, I got acquainted with him because one of my sisters babysit Herb Jr. And
Thanks, Tom.
so I got to go along sometimes because we were about the same age and we could have playtime together. And that's how I got to know Herb Jr. And I'll never forget 4th of July rolled around and he got a packet of fireworks. They used to come in big packs. And at that time, there was probably $50 to $70 worth of fireworks. Well, we didn't have any money, but my folks let me buy one big pop bottle, not a pop bottle rocket, but a skyrocket. One of those about this big around, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, I was over at Herb's shooting off all those fireworks. And then when I went home, I was going to shoot my firework off. And Mom made me stick the thing in the ground instead of slanting it on something. And all it did was shoot sparks out. Didn't go anywhere. It would have been fantastic, I'm sure, when it would have went to the moon. But anyhow, that was kind of our first get together as friends, and then another story about Herb Jr. was that Jim Murphy used to have a rodeo show of horses, and he lived out here on 51, and he had a place to jump his horses over fire and all that kind of stuff. And so he's putting on a little pre-show out there at his farm, and Herb knew about it, but pretty soon here comes this red pickup. They had a half-ton Chevy pickup at that time. They weren't very big. And all his buddies, and myself included, were out there already. And here comes this red pickup down the lane. It's kind of a long lane. And you couldn't even see a driver in there. Herb was down below the steering wheel. And so he'd come down Highway 51 and all the way from out north. He drives in there just like everything was under control. So that it was just a fun deal because him driving that pickup, and no bigger than he was, he could probably hardly reach the pedals because it was a stick shift, of course. And so we had a good time there.
How old would he have been?
Well, probably about 12.
Yeah, fairly tall.
And he used to come in, John Albers, which was a relation of his, they were cousins, into town, and it was up by the old high school. That's where John lived. And Herb would come driving in on this 50 Chevy that his dad had. And he'd come in there at night, park the Chevy on the side street. And of course, we'd raise Cain the rest of the night together, all of us buddies. And when it was over, sometimes he stayed at John's that night, and sometimes he drove home. And he couldn't see over the steering wheel very high then either. But oh my God. Yeah, we just had a lot of good times together.
Didn't you guys drive up to South Dakota or something when,
Oh, yeah.
when you were barely old enough to drive?
Well,
Dad, tell the story about when you got lost in Canada for a few days and the wives couldn't find you.
oh yeah, that was a fishing trip.
Everybody thought you were dead.
Yeah, well, that was with Doc Wardick. He had an airplane, and he had a twin engine, and he had all that stuff you needed for flying by the radio and all that. And so Herb, he sat in the co-pilot seat, and then there was myself and 3 more guys sitting back towards the back. And Doc left Wayne. We went up to Black Lake, and supposedly Doc knew this ahead of time, that there used to be a World War II landing spot up there for the warplanes to land, and they had fuel there in 55-gallon barrels. Still had it in 55 Anyhow, we're flying up there, and we run into a hell of a rainstorm. And Doc had not filed a, what do you call
Flight
it?
plan.
Flight plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hadn't filed it. And of course, the radio wasn't working right. And so Herb was supposed to be watching out the window on the passenger side for any landmarks. And Doc had this big map, and he had landmarks on it. Well, it was raining so damn hard you couldn't even see well, it was all water below us. It wasn't even any land hardly. So he was supposed to be telling Doc where we were at on the map. And the rest of us were sitting in the back and
Praying.
not looking out the window, that's for sure. Anyhow, Doc says, well, he says, the sun is supposed to be shining where we're going to land. Well, it's supposed to be, and it was raining just like cats and dogs. I mean, it was heavy. And nobody believed it was going to be no rain at that landing strip. And by God, there was. We got out there and got where that landing strip was, and it cleared just as you could see it flying into it. And so we landed. Oh, God. And everything was okay. And then we radioed the fishing hut, wherever we were going to, and they said they'd come and get us by boat. They did. So then we got back to the fishing hut, and I'm not kidding you, the communication was one of them old World War II crank radios. That's how they communicated. So we get there, and they're cranking on that thing, and there's somebody squawking on the other end about it. Is there some fishing people coming in fishing of Herb Albers and Bob Feller? Well, they were looking for us. Our wives were looking for us.
Probably rightfully so.
Right?
Yeah.
There was a squawking, and the guy said, yeah, they're here. Well, so that part cleared, that was fine. Oh, my God, I tell you what.
Well, weren't you missing for like 2 or 3 or 4 days or something,
Well,
somewhere in there?
It was a couple days.
My mom had 5 or 6 kids at home, and
Yeah.
A couple days.
She had Bonnie.
no communication.
If I don't have communication for 30 minutes, I'm in
Right.
trouble.
Well, Tom left, but his mom came over to our house and had all the kids praying the rosary for us.
And you guys out fishing and drinking. Just having a
Having a
great
good time.
time.
Boy, I tell you what, we caught hell when we got home. And it wasn't our fault, it was Doc's fault. Oh my God.
I can't imagine just disappearing for 2 or 3 days.
No.
And popping back, you're like, what? What did I do?
Oh, I'm going to show this to my wife immediately. She'll appreciate my level of communication. But you didn't have cell phones. You didn't have to
No,
worry
well,
about
they
that.
probably wouldn't have worked up there.
Passenger pigeon.
Well, then have you ever been on one of them beavers?
I have. I just recently, not fishing, but I just
Oh my
was
God.
up in Seattle.
Now that was another treat because we were going to go to a different lake to fish for northerns, and we caught them. We caught more by hand than we did with a rod and reel. But anyhow, they call this plane a beaver. It's got one engine and got a lot of power. So we loaded up to go to this other lake. So we had food and either 4 guys or 6 guys in that plane. and we took off in the water. And when we were taking off, you see these big boulders in the water. I mean, that was the scary part. Well, it was going to be more scary when we came back and we had to land on those boulders that were in the lake. That was the landing, supposedly the landing strip. Must have been the deepest water. And so we took off, made it over to the other spot. But when we came back, that's when I was worried that one of them big old pontoons was going to catch one of them big rocks, boulders that were in the water. Because when we took off, the guy maneuvered around all them boulders
Right.
so he wouldn't be taken off with where one of them was at. And that was interesting. So probably the most dangerous part is flying out and back in on that beaver plane.
And not when you got
Not
lost
when
in
we
the
got-
Aztec. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a trip.
So, any other stories with Grandpa that you think I should show my little Herb?
Oh yeah, that was a good one. And then well, we had I told this one I think at the funeral, but it was pretty exciting. Is that I was 16, he was 14, and my sister was 18, and she had a car. She had a '54 Ford. And she let me take her car, and Herb and I drove up to the lakes up at South Dakota, and no preparation whatsoever for going fishing. But anyhow, we got up there, and what's the name of that town up there that abandoned? And the
Devil's Nest.
No, it was shoot, I can't think of the name now. Anyhow, they had one of them theatrical plays outside, and so Herb and I, we were in the car. We didn't get a motel. We were just going to stay in the car that night. But we did. We stayed in the car, had the radio on, and that theatrical play was one of the villain deals, where
Oh, it was like a story time on radio.
yeah. Well, it was actually being performed up there, but they were broadcasting it. And this killer was on the loose. While it was part of the play, the killer was on the loose. He really wasn't on the loose where we were at, but we thought he was. We were scared stiff. So we stayed in the car all night. And the next morning, we took off, and then we discovered the next day that was just a story play, the theatrical play they put on. Well, we were relieved there really wasn't a killer out there. Oh my God. Well, we just had a good time. But what was the matter with my folks and his folks letting him go?
Yeah, why did they do that?
Yeah, that just surprises
They
me.
must have trusted you guys.
Well, I don't know why. Because we've been in plenty of trouble.
So you guys, you did a lot of traveling together,
Yeah.
and you had a lot of fun together. And,
Oh, yeah, we had a
and I
great
mean,
time.
and we still get to do that Okoboji trip with our two families. And
Yeah.
what if you're fast forwarding to me showing this to my son in 15, 20 years, what personality traits, things that the good things about my grandpa Herb, what things would you say, all right, little Herb, these are things to live up to within that?
Well, we really enjoyed each other's families, especially up at Okoboji. And back in the day, back when our kids were young, they had the banana, and you were young.
Yeah, I remember
They had the
that.
banana, and Herb and Lonnie Roth were on the banana, and I was driving the boat. And oh my God, you could swing them around and just have the best time. And anyhow, when we stopped, well, of course, I got them both flipped off the banana. So then they had to get back on the banana. And then we pulled the banana back up by the boat, and they both had to get in the boat. And neither one of them could get off of the banana because it was slick. And they couldn't get off of that. Everybody's laughing so hard that, you know, then it even makes it worse because then you can't hold on to anything or anything. Oh, that was a really fun time. And young Herb, I'm sure, will enjoy if they ever get the banana back up at Okoboji.
Yeah, I think our version of the banana has more handles and grips, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think you guys.
So, young Herb will probably get the opportunity to live in the same exact A-frames with the same decor
Yeah.
as it's been since the beginning.
Yeah,
since
it'll be 2044, and it'll be the same.
Still have green carpet and
Little slice of paradise there at Village West.
13-inch TVs. But
Yeah, you get to enjoy that, all right.
yeah, it'll be exactly as Grandpa experienced it.
Well, the
Time capsule.
funny part about that Okoboji deal, I don't know if I ever told you this or if Herb ever told you, but we both owned one of them cottages on the north side of the beach going up there. They were bigger than the ones we were in. But we decided we wanted to be on the other side of the beach and a little bit different configuration of the building. So anyhow, this guy that was selling them to us, we were having fun with him, and Herb and I were having fun with him, and shit, you'd have think we were been drinking because the conversation was, well, it was just hilarious. And so anyhow, we decided we was going to both buy one, but we had to flip a coin to decide who was going to get the one I'm in and the one Herb and Kathy had. And we had to flip a coin in. So we were flipping the coin, and the guy that was managing the salesman came over and told the salesman that we had to come up in the other room. So he took him in the other room, and he said, "What in the hell do you think you're doing over there?" "Oh," he said, "I'm selling the timeshare to both them guys." Yeah, but there's a whole lot of laughing going on, and nobody's serious over there. Well, he said they are serious. Here's the quarter to prove it. He had a good time with the quarter. He says they were trying to decide who was going to get which one of those cabins over there, and they flipped this quarter to decide who was going to get it. So I got to go back and just get them signed up. He said, "I've got them sold." Well, the guy that was in charge, he didn't like that all that commotion was going on because they had other people in there trying to buy one, you know, too, and he thought it was disturbing to him. And well, anyhow, we had a good time with that. And I still remember Herb. They let him use his American Express credit card to charge it to that credit card to buy that other. Now, why would they do that? I mean, I didn't have American Express, and you had to have an American Express for that to happen.
Probably because there's no limit.
So I didn't have one,
American
so
Express.
I gave him a check, and Herb used the damn credit card, which he got the benefit on that deal. Oh, my goodness. Well, then when we were on a trip in China, and we came down the Yangtze River, and we'd had about enough of bad food, and we got into
Been through that with you.
Hong Kong, and we got off of that ride, and I said, "You got a good steakhouse close around here?" And the guy said, "Yeah." He said, "We got a Ruth Chris just down that block and 3 blocks that way." Well, that's where we're going. We went there, and we all 4 ordered steaks and drinks, and it was about $500. I remember it was $500 a piece, but maybe it was only $500 total, but I think it was $500 a piece. Oh my God, it was so good. And so then we went back to our room, and we was in Hong Kong a couple days and eating poor food again. Decided Ruth Chris sounded pretty good. Back to Ruth Chris we went.
Oh my gosh, that's bizarre. Alan and I did the same exact
we had a
thing.
similar experience when we went to China. Blake and I and Jack,
Yeah.
we about every third day we hit a Ruth Chris or Morton's
Whatever we could get.
Oh, yeah.
to go ahead and get shored up on our
I'll,
beef.
I'll never forget. We went into this one restaurant. It's Wooloo Mooloo.
Yeah, that was
It
in
was
Hong
like-
Kong.
Yeah, and it was Greater Omaha beef. We're like, thank you. We'll do that.
It's like, oh, there's a good chance that probably came from Cumming County.
Yeah. But yeah, they'll drive you into the steakhouses with that food.
Oh my
I'd
God.
swear Ruth Chris paid the tour companies to get us some trash. But
Did you guys eat the real Chinese food where they had the big round table and all?
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
every meal except when we went with Chris.
Yeah, they had duck's feet on there.
Yeah, Peking duck.
We even tried the duck's feet. Oh my gosh! All I could think of when I was eating that duck's foot is them walking in their own shit. That was the sauce.
yeah. Oh. Well, Bob, any other stories or anything else you want to impart? Again, imagine you're fast forwarding 20 years here.
Yeah. Well, we went on some great trips together. Herb and Kathy and Judy and I. We were in Egypt, and we went up the Nile River.
Yep.
And if you ever go there, going up the Nile River was the best part of the trip, and that was aside from what we had signed up for. And we went up. It was beautiful scenery all the way up along that river, and then they had all the old ruins that they were cleaning off and rebuilding what was built one time. All those blocks that they have, like for the pyramids, a lot of that was along the river that they were cleaning off, and the sand was so. How they got covered up, the wind just blew the sand over the top of all that stuff. It wasn't bulldozed over it; it was the wind swept all that sand over it. But we had some good trips together. Really good.
Yeah, it's been kind of fun for Alan and I to get to have a good friendship, and then I've got great friendships with all your grandkids, and
Yeah.
it's been pretty cool.
And then we used to go boating together. We went over to North Lake or Columbus because it was close, and we both had boats, and Jeff ever tell you about the time up at Okoboji when we started going up there?
Mm-mm.
We both had boats, and Jeff was about old enough to be in charge of putting the boat in the water and stuff like that, you know. So he'd probably been 13 or 14, I don't know. Anyhow, Herb and Jeff were putting their boat in the water, and it was bad, but it was funny. And Herb's standing in the boat, and Jeff is backing the boat into the water. It was over there on the east side, East Okoboji,
East Lake.
but you're over on the west side of the lake, and then putting it in where all those buildings are.
Yep.
Anyhow, it was a nice place to put in. and Herb standing in the boat. And I don't know if Jeff or or Herb forgot to put the plug in the boat.
Mm.
And they're backing into the water, and Herb's telling Jeff, stop, stop, stop. He stops, and the water just keeps running in. Herb says, well, move ahead, move ahead, move ahead. So he moved it in, and then he got the boat out, and Jeff gets out. You give your grandpa hell. He said, God damn it, what's the matter with you? You had the plug out of the boat. You knew we were going to put the boat in the water.
I think he also earned some bad points too. I know he cracked the hull on a boat up in Yankton.
Well, I think that was Jerry.
Oh, that was Jerry.
Yeah,
that was Jerry.
Borrowed the boat.
Yeah, borrowed the boat and cracked the
Oh,
hull.
perfect.
I really appreciate it, Bob, and
Well, it was fun.
yeah, I appreciate it a lot. So with that, we'll call it good.